Hello and welcome to episode 108, the first bonus episode ever of the Rollo and Slappy show. If this actually makes it to be published, I don't know. But today is September 5th, 2018. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Car Campit. Slappy Jones might be catching up with us, but he is not here right now. I think he's got a fantasy football draft. I finished mine already, so I guess I care more about Liberty than Slappy does. And I can say all sorts of stuff about Slappy since he's not here. But, yeah, the show notes page for this will be mcflugel.com/108. And I wanted to do this, kind of did an audible. The Friends Against Government podcast with Bert Arcus and Car Campit came out today, and they were talking about the moon landing and kind of throwing some ideas out there about whether or not it could have been a hoax. And I think Car Campit laid out an argument that was the best that I've ever heard that would make someone lean towards saying it was a hoax. Although I hold that it, I still think that we actually, the people landed on the moon. That's not really that important, because there were some things that Carr said that I disagreed with, that I wanted to have him on and talk about it and kind of flesh these ideas out. One, to make sure that I wasn't being, crazy about what was in my own head. And two, just to kind of talk through some of these ideas that I think are interesting, more about how the world works, how engineering works, how markets work, just kind of have that discussion. So I'm going to send it over to Carr. And I'm going to have him just kind of give a very quick rundown of what his argument was, if that's possible. So, Carr?
Yeah, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on. That was our podcast did exactly what I wanted it to, which was to spark a little bit of discussion, because I'm not sure that I'm sold on any one particular thing. And just for anybody that's listening to this that didn't listen to our episode, while it did, I think it did inadvertently lay out a case for it being a hoax, or maybe more accurately for it, for my desire to be a hoax from a game theory angle, just as a lower risk alternative to doing it. So I'll kind of lay out what the argument was. So I think man, Rollo, we've been in so many discussions today. Now I'm a little bit scrambled, but so I think basically what it boiled down to was there are kind of two steps to this. So the first step is, what do you think the odds, the percentage odds that NASA calculated of success of Apollo 11 in 1969, or versus failure, what be prior to launch, regardless. So as we move through this, you almost need to forget about the fact that it, quote unquote, happened. You forget about the hoax. We're really just analyzing the game theory leading up to the event. So the first part is, what do you think the odds are that NASA calculated of success? If those odds were below some certain threshold, would it have been sane to go through with it, keeping in mind all the geopolitical ramifications? And I brought up treason in our podcast, mostly just to spark discussion and maybe spark a little emotion. But then the second layer was, I would assume that, keeping in mind the ultimate goal was not to put somebody on the moon, but the ultimate goal was to win the space race, to maintain or increase geopolitical clout, that they would be also inspecting other alternatives. The second alternative, I think, is pretty well known, and I think it's pretty declassified that they were at least putting some money into it, would be hoaxing it, and developing some kind of false film, and false launch event or what have you. I don't know exactly how that would go through with it, but and then analyzing what the percentage odds that they calculated that they could pull that off and convince the American public. And then analyzing those two things and then analyzing why, in fact, they went with the moon landing, the real moon landing, if indeed they did. Is that, Rollo, did I do a decent job of kind of giving a summary of where I was at?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, they're kind of managing risk, and
yeah,
it would be a big black eye for them if they couldn't get someone on the moon, especially after JFK said, we're going to do it.
Right.
And then they can't do it. They have failure after failure. It makes, the United States, the Western world, that way of life look weak and soft. I guess even regardless of what the Soviets ended up doing. I mean, I don't even know how close they were to putting the man on the moon. Obviously, they put man in space before the U.S., but, yeah, I think that lays it out. I like the game. I never thought of it, through the lens of game theory. And I think if you're going to make the case that it was a hoax, I think that's the strongest case for it. So I guess where I wanted to come in and say where I disagreed with some of your, assumptions, because the way that you ended up talking about it, the likelihood of landing on the moon in 1969 ended up being extremely low, especially compared to today. I'm not sure I agree with that, and I don't want that to seem, it's weird because it's kind of counterintuitive, and that's why I wanted to bring you on to talk about it, because you have the same, probably the same way you would approach the engineering and stuff behind it. And just so I could bounce the stuff off you and make sure I'm not saying something insane or stupid. So I got to think how I want to phrase this correctly, but we definitely have better technology today than 1969. I mean, that's really, really obvious. But at the same time, physics and engineering, that doesn't change. I mean, they are fairly objective things. I don't think that the physics behind putting a man on the moon has really changed, between now and then. We have better, the thing that gets brought up all the time is they use, standard calculator has more computing power than what they had to put a man on the moon. And let's take that as true. I'm not denying that, but the engineering principles were still there. You do it by hand. It might take more brain power. It might take a little more time than running it on a computer, but we have all this software today. At what cost does that come at? As far as the individual engineer having the knowledge and the know-how of how to do stuff. Because when you're outsourcing that work to a computer, you don't need to have that understanding as much anymore. I mean, I do it in my own job. I have to run some analyses, and you punch numbers into a computer. And you have to kind of understand what you're doing, but you don't understand the nitty-gritty details of what's happening. So because of that, I think you kind of lose a little bit of that, we'll call it an edge or whatever. So we're I guess the point I'm trying to make was, what was the quality of the engineer back in the 60s compared to today? Because you look in even my own industry in working in refining, those old engineers, I mean, they were using slide rules and stuff, and they were doing the same thing that I'm doing today, except I have the benefit of computer software that I can run a calculation in, less than a second. Whereas they had to do it by hand, which meant that they probably really understood what was going on, maybe a little better than me. So from that stance, and that's kind of just the beginning of it. And I might be kind of going off on all sorts of tangents here, but let me take a step back first. Well, first of all, does that make sense what I was saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And And to support your argument against mine, when I threw this out there, I was actually kind of surprised to see how many people came back with estimated higher odds of success, way higher odds than I would have anticipated. And to your point, yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, physics doesn't change and engineering doesn't change.
Yeah, we just develop better tools, and that might make the that's
right. So, I guess where I'm just looking at this from a percentage basis, and so when you talk about our industry, so you're in petroleum and you're on the mechanical side, and I'm a civil and land development, and I mean I have witnessed, through my career, which hasn't been super long, but long enough that that we've really started to bring in 3D modeling for site development. I have witnessed the amount of error reduction, and I mean it's very obvious because when something goes into construction, when an error is made, you end up usually having to rip out curb and gutter or a manhole or paving or whatever. And software has made just the amount of human error and the ability to make human error has decreased with a lot of the software. It just won't allow you to make certain errors. Like, for instance, if you were to propose a water main at the same elevation as a storm sewer pipe crossing, it won't allow you to do it. It'll, as long as you put it in the software, it'll say, hey, you can't do this, or you're gonna have a problem in the field. Whereas maybe that's something that you would miss if you were doing it by hand, because it's not in the model and maybe they're on different cut sheets or something like that. So there's I mean, I have been personal witness to the crazy amount of error reduction that software has brought to at least my engineering field. And with that, obviously time and money savings, but I want to highlight the all of the calculations that they were doing, and I won't get even close because it's just not my field. But you're basically modeling the effect of forces from the engines and from all the elevators and ailerons and all that shit on your vehicle through varying levels of atmosphere and gravity on two different bodies. And that alone is just, I just can't even, I can't get my mind around doing that.
Yeah.
That is an incredible feat. I mean, to come up with a way to estimate the, everything from the pressures, the drag, and therefore the necessary thrusting power to, decrease or increase velocity as needed. And the different gravitational fields, which are variable all the way from Earth to Moon. Whew, man, that in itself is a feat.
Yes. Oh, I agree. And just to touch on the error reduction, I don't disagree with that. The one counter I would say to that is that there is a much greater consequence of having an error that would cause a failure on sending a rocket into space versus putting a water main in the ground. So presumably they would be more careful with the launching the rocket.
Yeah.
That you would hope that there would be more checking and everything. And there is the story of I think they put a satellite into orbit and someone didn't convert units correctly, and so it just went completely off course. So, I mean, when you have a computer, it eliminates a lot of error, but also, the software is only as good as the input. So,
Sure. Yeah, no, for
sure. So yeah, that is a good
else equal. Like you would have to say that you would rather software modeling
yes.
to guess at throwing a projectile at the moon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So here's where I wanted to take it, where I think kind of the meat of my argument is that I think that the simplicity of what they had, well, I'll call it simplicity, but compared to what the technology we have today, I think it almost handcuffs you with trying to get everything to jive together. I'll take, going with government stuff, because it was it was NASA doing this, so it was the government. But if you look at the development of, airplanes, and I just pulled this up right now, the P-51 Mustang was just one of the most popular fighter planes in World War II. Just on the Wikipedia page, it looks like sometime in kind of the first half of 1940, they kind of said, hey, we need to do something and develop this plane. Its first flight was October of 1940, and it was introduced in January 1942. So that's pretty quick turnaround. Compare that to the F-22, which is kind of the premier fighter today, in the U.S. That was in 1981. This is again Wikipedia. In 1981, the U.S. Air Force developed a requirement for an advanced tactical fighter as a new air superiority fighter to replace the F-15 Eagle and F-16 Fighting Falcon. So that project was started in 1981. The F-22's first flight was in September 1997 and was introduced in December 2005. So because of how much more complicated these things are, it takes so much more time, so much more energy, so many more resources to be able to get to the point where you can kind of have something workable. There's a lot of variable. There's a lot of things that go into that. One being, and you mentioned it, that back in the day with fighting in the Cold War, quote unquote, fighting in the Cold War and the space race and everything, there were a lot of people that were just so gung ho about this. And I think that the culture was just a little bit different, that they could take a little more risks. If you had a project like this, I mean, what was I forget which Apollo mission it was that they blew up on the launch pad, or it was like a test launch,
Apollo
thing.
1.
Yeah, Apollo 1, and they killed the guys. Would that be tolerated today as much? If you kill some astronauts, that they say, hey, well, let's just keep going. Let's plow through. There's currently like the V-22. I know that project's a mess and they kill people every once in a while. So maybe that isn't a good argument, but,
well, let me go back.
I'm kind of jumping around here. So
before Slappy comes online. So I would argue that the least common denominator between the space launch and the P-51 Mustang was necessity. I mean, regardless of whether it was government doing it or not, I mean, in 1940, World War II had been declared, not by us necessarily, but by 1940, it was heavily suspected that we would need to be a part of it. And I've, of course, put need in quotes for everybody, where I stand on all that. But so there was a need for that fighter, which, of course, became one of the most prolific fighters of World War II. Again, with the space shuttle, the space race had been declared during the height of the Cold War, and so that president's ass was on the line, and they don't necessarily like to lose. Whereas the F-22 came, when did the production start, in the early 80s?
I mean, it was kind of the idea behind it in 1981. They said, hey, we need this thing.
I'm not diminishing the role of the Cold War in the 80s, because, there in certain aspects that was kind of another little mini peak. But like the bulk of the development of the F-22 came during a time of absolutely no threat towards the United States, where they didn't really need to bring it online. And also, the F-22 doesn't do anything that anything else doesn't already do. Not really. I mean, you know, what does the F-22 do significantly better than the F-18 to the point where we would be, or the F-14 or the F-15 or the F-16, that we would be at a disadvantage to other nations, whereas during the space race, that was something that was completely up to the next level. Right. The P-51 was completely to the next level. I mean, we were still phasing out shit, man. We were phasing out just like bananas World War I planes at that point.
Oh yeah, well yeah. I mean, World War II, it wasn't just the P-50, the Mustang that they were cranking out all sorts of stuff. Yeah, and what you're saying kind of is kind of what I was trying to say was that it was a little bit not quite reckless abandon, but they were more willing to just be like, yo, let's go with this. Let's do it. We got to do it. Let's go.
Yeah.
And also the technology was simpler, so you didn't have to do. It wasn't as complicated to get something out. And I'll bring up now the F-35, which is supposed to be, you know, the greatest, you know, air superiority fighter that's ever existed, but I think it loses in simulated dogfights to the F-15.
Yeah.
And why is that? It's because it's so jam-packed with all this technology, all this fly-by-wire crap, that it's to make all of that sync up together and not be contradicting itself and fighting itself. Like literally the computers in there are fighting itself, that it takes forever. And that's what adds the costs and everything. So that's why, I guess that's the point I was saying that to do, what was it, $30 million or $30 billion?
Yeah.
Because it was a simpler technology. They didn't have to worry about all that stuff, that it makes it plausible.
No, I agree. I definitely agree with that to some degree. But I also firmly believe that if, let's just say, like, if China invaded or got into a huge war with England or something like that, where we anticipated that we may be dragged in, and again, I'm going to put "we" and all that shit in quotes because everybody knows. But just from the game theory standpoint, I bet somebody would put their boot down and be like, "Yo, Lockheed, you got to lock this shit down, dude. You need to disassemble whatever you need to disassemble, and you need to reassemble whatever you need to reassemble, and you need to give us a fighting craft in a year." And I guarantee you they'd do it. Like, I think it's far more a function of the fact that nobody ever has to complete anything.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, I mean, we don't need it. I mean, we probably don't even really need an Air Force if it really came down to it. You know,
right.
There's no real motivating factor. I think it's far more motivating factor than technological inhibition or whatever. I think anytime, government or not, if there's somebody with a boot in your ass, you're going to finish the project. And I don't think there's anybody. I think the F-35 was a boondoggle from the start, and I don't think anybody has ever I hardly believe that anybody with any real pull in that project has ever conceived that this thing was supposed to finish on time, under budget, and for the fighting American Republic. Like, I just don't think so. I think it's just been a money pit from the get-go, and I bet as soon as you get sucked into that project, you realize it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be the first one. I mean, the Comanche, that stealth attack helicopter, what the entire program cost was supposed to ended up being the cost to produce one helicopter, and they ended up canceling it. Yeah. You look at the DDX project for the Navy with the stealth destroyer, and it's another boondoggle. But I think that gives kind of some credence to the point that, and this is kind of, I guess, where I was trying to drive that was the $30 billion thing, where it's like, it seems like not a lot of money, but if we were in that situation where it's like, we just need something out right now, assuming that they just don't use technology, like they don't send F-16s over and F-18s that probably, are plenty good enough. But they need to develop something new and send it over, that they just wouldn't strip out all of the crap and kind of make just something workable, so that it would drive the cost down. Because we're comparing, it's tough to compare, something that's so jammed up with all this stuff that's causing all these problems versus, the technology from 50 years ago that was a lot simpler. So if you kind of took that approach where it was just let's get not a skeleton out, but only what we really need, you would absolutely speed it up and bring the cost down. So I think that would go to show that it is comparable to say to say that, oh, well, they only spent $30 billion to put man on the moon. I think that makes it a little bit easier to say, yeah, I guess that's more plausible. As opposed to just comparing what we have now, like saying, well, the F-22 and F-35 cost, what is it? The program cost of the F-22 is $67 billion as of 2011. So who knows what it is now?
Yeah. No, I mean, I see where you're coming from. I think, and I'm struggling between getting down into the numbers and then not getting down to the numbers. Mm-hmm. But I think to summarize my point and to bring it back to just the actual feat of doing what they did without, and I'm sure they had some kind of rudimentary fly-by-wire or something, but more or less it was human beings. And mm-hmm. the just outrageousness of a bunch of engineers coming up with calculations on how to maneuver an aircraft and then telling that to other human beings, and then those human beings going and just kind of gripping and ripping it out into outer space, flying to the fucking moon, landing the craft without damage, and then launching it, and then coming back into Earth's atmosphere and landing without dying is crazy.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's crazy, and I just can't wrap my mind around a win rate of over 50%. Like it's on the first try. Like and you know, you can go say like, okay, well, you know, they tried to put people in orbit and they'd launched off the launch pad. Okay, fine. So what does that increase your success rate of getting to Earth's orbit to? You know, I'll give you 80%. I'll give you 90%, but crossing that huge void between the Earth and the moon of space trash and radiation and miscalculation, overshooting the moon and going off into the goddamn universe, and then flipping the craft around and lowering yourself down into a brand new atmosphere with a brand new gravitational pull, which had to be estimated, landing the craft with no significant damage to the craft or the personnel, getting out, getting back in, and launching it back, and also keeping in mind, you know, I mean, these previous missions were rife with human problems too. I mean, mm-hmm. just the duration of people having to spend in together in a cabin. I mean, I think Apollo 7 almost ended in a mutiny or something like that. Like it just people would not get along all that great. And it was a high pressure situation. I mean, adding all of this stuff up, there is just no way in 1969 I can get my mind around a majority. Like I would go down to Vegas and bet on success. Like I just wouldn't. I could not do that. I cannot wrap my mind around the fact that if Vegas had an open odds pick 'em on, do these guys go out to the fucking moon and all the way back, and we recover them and their craft all intact, I can't imagine that line opens at even.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I don't know how I would do the odds. It is incredible. I guess I will say that they, you know, all the Apollo missions leading up to Apollo 11 actually landing on the moon, it was each step of the way. So what was it? Was it like Apollo 9 or Apollo 10? They orbited the moon. So I guess I can understand.
Well, it was unmanned though.
No, I thought they did have a manned orbit of the moon. Let's see. Let's ignore the.
Even if it is manned, that doesn't eliminate what is my most problematic part of it, which is landing and relaunching.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's huge. Okay, so here's Apollo 10. It was the fourth manned mission of the United blah, 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 and the second orbit to the moon. It was the F mission, a dress rehearsal for the first moon landing, tested all the components and procedures, just short of actually landing. The lunar module followed a descent orbit to within 8.4 nautical miles of the lunar surface. At the point where powered descent for the landing would normally begin, success enabled the first landing to be attempted at Apollo. Okay. Yeah, so this kind of might seem like I'm turning the wheel kind of hard, but what about like it's I don't want to say this without seeming ridiculous, but I mean they did have you mentioned the estimates of like the lunar or the gravitational pull and all the stuff about the moon. I mean they did know about that for hundreds of years though, right? I mean it was hundreds of years that they were able to be really accurate on that stuff. So it's not like they had to necessarily reinvent the wheel there. And then that's less important to the point, like we still can't figure out or exactly how humans have done things in the past, like the pyramids. The way that those are built.
I figured it out. Not everybody else has come around to my conclusion.
Yeah, well, not everyone is sniffing glue. But like the way that the way all the stone they cut the stones and they fit them together. I mean, it's insane that they can.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. I think what's baffling to me about it is the bang bang play aspect of it. So, if you're going to be a dogfighter in the Air Force in World War II, you're going to go through reps and reps and reps, and you're going to try and you need to understand every aspect of your plane. So while you can mathematically grasp the mathematical pull and the atmospheric drag and all of that, regardless, that's the first time that somebody had their hand on the joystick and the throttle, and they were bringing it in for a landing. And to nail it on the first go around, what is that? I mean, is that like kicking a field goal from 50 yards? Like, I mean, what is that equivalent? Like that we need to really figure out what that is, because that's pretty wild to me. Is that somebody would come in for a landing on a foreign body and with no concept. It's like what if during the day when all of these airliners are up in the air, we suddenly change the gravitational pull and the atmospheric drag. I mean, how many of those are going to successfully land?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree there. It is a huge feat, and I hope it doesn't seem like I'm like trying to downplay.
Yeah. No.
How insane it is. I guess I'm just trying to bring up examples of other times in human history, which is difficult because, there's no other time on human history that we did this in literally another celestial place.
Yeah. I mean, it's just mind blowing. So I guess what I was trying to get, where I was trying to lead Bird through a little bit through at the end of the podcast, and that I was trying to lead the group, was there's basically three major stages of this thing, and assigning a success rate to each one of those stages. So the first stage would be, launching from Earth and getting to where your staging area in Earth's orbit. Then the second would be getting to the moon, landing and relaunching, and the third would be breaching atmosphere on the way back to the Earth and getting back to the Earth alive.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one, I think I'm willing to go with a fairly high success rate, say 80-90%. I mean, we had done it before, although, granted, of the manned ones, I think the success rate prior to that if you averaged them all out, was like about 80%. I mean, there's a couple that burned up on the launch pad or just never went.
Mm-hmm.
So I think 80 is I'm comfortable with 80. Could be higher, could be maybe lower, but that seems reasonable to me. And then the question is, the big linchpin to me is, what is the success rate percentage? What are we betting on for landing on the moon and relaunching?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, yeah, I'm hesitant to assign numbers to it just because I have no idea. I have no idea.
Right. But okay, let's back into it though, right? We're engineers here. So let's say you give launch pad to atmosphere 80%, and let's say you give re-entry into Earth's atmosphere and successful scoop mission from the ocean, everybody comes back alive. Let's say you give that 80, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would say, I don't know. Did they have his? Because 80% is actually pretty. I mean, when you break it up into 3 parts, 80% is actually very low. When you've got to take all three or four pieces together.
Well, that's what I'm getting at.
I know. That's your point.
That's kind of where I'm going with this, is that if you take parts 1 and 3 and you assign it 80% each, which I don't know if that's all that unreasonable, you better be damn near nailing 100% on the relaunch to beat 50%.
Well, have they ever had any sort of re-entry issues that you're aware of?
Yeah, yeah, wasn't there like the famous one with like the space tile, or one of the tilings failed?
Oh, on the space shuttle, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it resulted in any deaths, but
no, I don't think so. I'm just bringing this. Yeah, I mean, Challenger was up going. I mean, that's been studied to death, and that was not an engineering flaw. That was a stupid management decision. Or was an engineering issue, but it was known and, not corrected. They decided to roll the dice.
So, yeah, right. Okay, so, I mean, do you want to give it 90?
I probably higher, actually. I mean, and again, this is me just having no actual real clue.
Let's give it 100.
Okay.
So
because I think
on the way out, 100% on the way back.
Even I mean 80% on the way out. I think the
you
big
think 100's low. Maybe give it 110.
Yeah, make it 1,000%. No, I'm just I think that going out and again, let me preface this with I don't actually know. But I think going out and coming back in are, pretty reasonable to say that they're probably a very highly likely chance they're going to do it. I think what you were mentioning is the actual, going into the orbit of the moon and landing it is the real kind of thing. And then like, redocking, they got to redock once they get back, once they go back up.
And so just to reground with math, if you give it a 90% chance of success on the way out and 100% chance of success on the way back, you got to peg it at 55% chance of landing and relaunch in order to remain above 50-50 odds.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That it's that when you break up in 3 parts like that.
That's a way to break it down,
mm-hmm.
and because those are 3 very distinct phases that probably that definitely involve different equipment,
mm-hmm. and different astronauts.
What's that? Different
astronauts every time.
What do you mean different astronauts?
That every time like every one of these Apollo missions, I don't think they did.
Oh yeah. No. I meant just 3 phases of that one mission.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And when you start to break it down like that, man,
yeah,
if you're not padding it with a pretty high percentage on the exit or entry of Earth, you that number starts to tank pretty quick.
Yeah, and that's why I mean we're engineers, so we'd love to see the see the data on it, see where they're actually. I mean, how awesome would it be to just kind of pick one of these engineers' brains?
Oh yeah, I'd love to know that number because they had it. They had some
mm-hmm.
number. I
mean, it's like any engineer that does any of this kind of stuff, you got to calculate risk for stuff that you're designing
you
and
move forward without calculating risk and putting in factors of safety.
Yeah, when you expect it to fail, how do you expect it to fail?
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know if you had more to say about this, but the next thing I wanted to bring up, and I had like 80 million things in my head that I mostly forget now. But what do you say about the other 5 manned landings to the moon after that? Like, does that Because at what point, like, what would be the incentive for them to just continue, like, to fake it another 5 times? I'm assuming that if they faked it the first time, that they're probably decided that it's too risky and not going to try it later. Because if they, so does it? I guess, yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say that would be significant pull towards non-hoax side.
Yeah,
significant. I mean, there's no way around that. Like I mean, repeatability is an engineer's dream, right? Like that's what we strive. That's how you know you did it right. That's how you know it wasn't just a cowboy making the right pull on the joystick. Like that means that they calculated things right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's no question. But I guess to the counterpoint would be if that. So I don't think that they went into this whole thing. If you're going from a game theory, okay, so let's back. Okay, I'll tell you what. So you move the clock forward. I'm going to move it back, and I'm wondering how Kennedy came up with his decision to say we're going to land on the moon. Why was that the target? I mean, there's the obvious, like the moon. It's right. It's relatively close, but it's romantic because it's that thing that we all see, and but he must have named it because he thought it was reasonable, and not he, obviously his advisors. And so there must be some amount of feasibility. But I think that, and while I will concede every bit of repeatability is a heavy indicator of success. Could it be that like Bird was indicating, and like it is pretty well known that they were devoting time and resources to some sort of cover up or hoaxed film or something like that. Could it be that it actually was a failure and we don't know what happened, and they learned something, and then that propelled them into success in the subsequent missions? That's like way out in the weeds. Like there's no way,
right?
There's no, because nothing other than just talking to back it up. But
because then, even then too, like, does it matter then if they hoaxed the first couple moon landings?
Well, it doesn't matter anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean that, yeah, like you were saying that in your episode where it's like it doesn't affect my life either way. Like I don't really care if and I agree. If I found out, like I believe that that there were lunar landings, but if I found out tomorrow, without a doubt that it actually was a hoax, I'd be like, okay, I was wrong. Yeah. It's not going to change anything in my life.
No, yeah, right. I wouldn't go parading around the streets with success or hanging my head in shame, depending on which way the result went. It just wouldn't. It just doesn't matter.
Right. I forget what I was going to say. I forget what I was going to say. And it was probably the most brilliant point in the world that was going to just put everything to rest. Of course.
Well, let's get Slappy in here. He's been hanging out, but
let's get Slappy to the foreground.
Bring him to the foreground.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, kind of hear you. It sounds like you're actually. It sounds like you're on the moon because we're not hearing.
Yeah, no, I'm not on the moon yet. I'm in the orbit of the moon.
Okay.
Well, I got some bad news, Slappy. You got a pretty low odds.
Only 55% chance from here on out. Oh, that's what I wanted to say about Kennedy saying that picking the moon and everything.
Push him to the background.
Yeah, push Slappy back to the background. Go hang in orbit for a little bit. No, it's just they're lucky that it wasn't Donald Trump was president back then. He's like, we're gonna land man on the sun. Yeah. And be like, all right, let's try to do this. And then they might have to fake that one. They'll have the video. Can you imagine the video of the astronauts like keeping their feet off the ground and you go ooh ooh ooh?
Oh my god.
That would have been harder to fake, but I probably would have believed that one too. That they landed on the sun.
Oh Lord. Yeah. So Slappy, what's your thoughts?
Well, so I jumped on in the middle, and you were talking about a whole bunch of military stuff that I have no idea about.
We love the military here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And but what I was thinking back then, Rollo, did you mention the Osprey?
Yeah.
Oh, you did. See, that was what I was going to bring up. And then I guess I think they actually did land on the moon. And there had to be a first time. And whether the odds were high or low, I mean, you were mentioning there was 5 others maybe, or 4 others?
Yeah, 5 others.
Are you pretty confident they did them? So, one of them had to be the first one. And whatever that first one was had to be scary as hell, and you don't know what's going to happen, but someone's got to do it if it's going to happen. So, even if right now, I kind of caught this part, or missed this part of your conversation, but you were talking about the difference between now and back in the 1960s, and which is easier or better, or what, maybe we can eliminate human error now. But even if today was the first time we had a landing on the moon, it's not going to be 100%. There's going to be some doubt, and the astronaut who goes and does it is, I guess has balls or whatever. And it's got to happen a first time once. So whatever that is in the future, landing on Mars or whatever, there's going to be really low odds, and people might die. I mean, people died in the Apollo mission before Apollo 11. We weren't planning on that, but every time they learn a little more. So I don't know if I add anything to this discussion at all. Some sales guy talking to 1.5 engineers. I don't know, the stuff you guys do about your calculations and all that errors and stuff, but the way I understand it is they got it pretty exact with orbit. Like these planets, whatever the moon is moving at a speed they can calculate pretty well. And there's not going to be much resistance in space. Is that correct? I mean, it's a vacuum. You're just kind of going.
Yeah, unless
if you miss, you're screwed. But I think they can do it. I mean, it's a science, right? Or am I just way off on all this?
No, I agree. I mean, I think you could do. It's like anything else. I mean, you can figure out any sort of physical thing, motion and everything. There's calculations for it. There's theory that you can figure out, but actually making sure that you get all of the variables correct and accounting for all that. And Bird brought up a good thing when you talk about sending the Yingling down the Mississippi.
Salmon might get
it. Yeah. There's a lot of things you got to try to account for, and that's kind of the difficulty. And then also you've got human pilots, so you got to make sure that they're doing it correctly. But no, I mean, yeah, I mean, we kind of. You said that again. You kind of broke up.
Okay. So Carl was saying how incredible it is to do all this, and I completely agree. I can't even wrap my head around how it's possible. But what really blows my mind is on re-entry to the Earth, they hit the ocean, and someone can go get them. I mean, one, what if you miss the ocean? You're dead, right?
Probably.
I'm surprised you can survive hitting the ocean. That's got to be some impact when you land.
I had a nice little parachute there.
Yeah, but
I don't actually know how hard they would have hit.
Yeah, I don't either.
I mean, you're falling from really high up. I know they have a parachute.
They all got up and they jumped in the capsule right as it hit, so that it didn't feel the impact.
Yeah, it's like when you're riding on a train and the bridge is kind of old and you're not sure it's going to hold up. They have everyone lift their feet up off the ground.
Yep. Yeah, you just lift the feet, take the weight off.
Yep.
It's normal. That's how I engineer things.
No.
Yeah, and so what we kind of brought that up earlier. It's that that for hundreds of years they kind of knew this stuff about, sizes of planets. I think they were able to figure out the weight of the Earth and planets somehow, like pretty well.
You can measure the gravitational pull on a planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you have the size of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're able to figure out a lot of stuff, but it's like we said, it's.
But you never actually did it, so you don't actually know.
Well, it's all the variables that you might not be able to account for. It's the theoretical versus the practical.
Yeah, I mean, it's like doing a barrel roll in a plane for the first time. Like theoretically, you can work it out all you want, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to go up there and jam the stick to the left and make it do it and come out of it alive. And the first time's always scary.
Yeah, I mean that guy who stole the plane out in Seattle,
right?
Or I think it was Seattle or Tacoma, or is that
SeaTac Airport up in Seattle.
Yeah, okay. I mean, he did a barrel roll, right? Or he did like a
that's a good point. Is Sky King the ultimate flaw in my argument?
I think so. I mean, what they're telling you is he actually flew to the moon. They didn't tell. They didn't let us know.
The moon landed, came back, and said he learned it from playing video games.
I mean, I think that I buy that. Carl, you're wrong.
But I like it better if it's all a host. Like that would be really cool.
Yeah, it would be cool.
Just not one of them.
I don't know. I maybe it's the engineer in me. Maybe it's the kind of little kid in me that likes space and thinks that's kind of cool. I kind of hope it happened.
Oh yeah, no, I think it did, and I think it's awesome that it did. And for all the things that Carl was saying about how mind blowing it is to do that, totally agree. So it's kind of cool if it's real, which I do believe. But if it wasn't, it's like, government's screwing us again.
Right. Yeah, like we were saying earlier, it's if I found out tomorrow without a doubt that it was a hoax, then I'd be like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I'm going to go around run out the house with disheveled hair and just being like, my life no longer has any meaning. It'd be like if, that's how I would react if my tractor was stolen or something.
Yeah, there it is.
But the other thing is these astronauts train their entire lives for this. It's not like they show up on launch day and they're like, all right, time to go to space.
Oh, I thought they did it like how they get migrant workers at a farm. They just drive their pickup truck up and say, hey, there's one truck that comes up. All right, we're picking strawberries. Another one, hey, we're picking corn. Another, hey, we're flying to the moon. All right, next one comes up. Hey, we're picking blueberries.
Lunar mission.
There's also a military base near my house that's no longer a military base. Like an old one used to have an airfield. There's a couple of them actually. But there's one I go run/walk at. And they had the original centrifuge that, the early astronauts, it was done there. So, John Glenn, and isn't there a Shepard? Isn't that
Alan Shepard?
Alan Shepard. Yeah, they all trained there in this giant centrifuge, which the building's still there. And the gondola that they, sit in is still there. You can see it. That doesn't prove they went to outer space, but it kind of proves they had this thing to spin people around at a stupid speed and have whatever G-force, to train for, or that sucks your eyes to the back of your head. These guys go through all this stuff. It seems like a lot to do for a hoax, although they get to be pretty famous and probably make a lot of money off it. So I don't know.
So what you're saying is that's the place where they launch the drones with machine guns attached to them to go to Las Vegas.
All right, with that.
Whoa!
The drone is actually a different one, but yeah, there is a drone airfield or whatever near my house. I don't know what they call it, where they operate drones.
So you live.
I passed one on the way back from New Mexico this last winter, and it was really startling.
Yeah, it'd be weird. I wouldn't like that.
But all right, well, Rollo, I gotta bounce.
Okay.
And Slappy too. I gotta bounce here in a sec. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. I think it's I like talking about this stuff because there's no good answer necessarily unless we're just completely missing it. But it brings up a lot of interesting ideas and points that, I mean, I don't think I would ever really think about without you bringing up the moon landing thing. So,
I've actually never thought about it until today.
So yeah, and if anyone out there listening has any feedback or says, "Hey, you're wrong here," or "I agree here," or something, or just say, "Hey, ignore Carr because he's a civil engineer," let us know.
Well, and if anybody has any inside track information on those engineering calcs on what they calculated that success rate to be, I mean, that's really what I'm after. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that would provide most of the. I mean, if
it would provide the answer to my game theory proposition.
Yes, if they came back and said "Hey, we're in the high 90s for everything," right, then it's
I would be shot. Yeah, that would torpedo the interesting discussion.
But we're not privy to that information, so we just got to do blind conjectures shooting from the hip, which makes it more fun. Yeah.
I present it as fact.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up so we can get Carr out of here. So show notes page is mcflugel.com/108. Again, you're welcome for this bonus episode, surprise episode. We kept this a secret, so I'm not going to tell anyone. I'll probably release it tomorrow. It's kind of getting late. I want to go to bed. But we'll link to the Carr and Birds episode about this that they posted earlier today. So make sure you give that a listen because that provides. I mean, if you're hearing this now, and it's probably too late for you to go back and listen to it. So, but before this, but still go back and listen to it because Carr went into a lot more detail. Might help you flesh out some of these ideas a little bit more. And subscribe to their podcast. Check them out on Twitter at BirdArchist and at CarCampit. Make sure to subscribe to us on mcflugel.com. We're on Stitcher, iTunes, Podbeam, all those podcast catchers, and give us a a review if you don't mind. That really helps us out. Share us with your friends and family, anyone who might think this is interesting, or just people you want to drive crazy and annoy. That works too. Anybody really.
Share with your enemies too.
Yeah. And last but not least, check out libertymugs.com.
Liberty Mugs.
Liberty Mugs.
I don't just it doesn't have the same ring to it. Liberty Mugs. So all right, we'll catch you not next week, but in half a week, since we're releasing this not on a Monday. So all right.
Do we have episode planned for this week?
Do we what?
Do we have an episode planned for this week?
Yeah, we're having a special guest, assuming it doesn't fall through. So
sweet.
Should be a good one.
Cool, check it out.
Sweet.
And it's not Carr.
It might be though.
Yeah, actually, probably it's probably a good chance. All right.
We could bump our guest for Carr.
That would probably be a good career move on our part. Not.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Hey.
See ya.